I had a dream recently that completely changed my perspective on something I've been resistant to for a while, and that is neopronouns. I know that an entire video based on a dream is kinda lame. I'm not here to defend the validity of spirituality or dreams. I can only say that I had one perspective the night before, and the dream showed me an entirely new one. Anyway, in case you don't know what neopronouns are, they are a new invented way of referring to a person in place of he, she, or they. This usually coincides with non-binary identities, including xenogender identities, where a person describes their gender as anything other than man or woman, like fairy gender or deer gender. For example, they, them, I think it is, or they, fair, or these other ones. Also, although it's not a new word, its could be considered a neopronoun in that you typically don't refer to a person as it. Now, I was never completely against neopronouns, I just didn't want to use them. I didn't care what people were doing, my perspective was just don't make people use them. I don't want to call someone it, and I shouldn't be forced to. And while what I saw in this dream does not have to do with the ethics of whether a person chooses to use them or not, for themselves or for others, it did show me the significance of why they are appearing and the positive role they were playing in our culture. Now, what I'm about to describe might already be obvious to neopronoun users, but honestly I've never heard it described in these terms before. Having said that, let's jump in. First, I'm going to describe a short section of my dream that preceded the part about neopronouns, mainly because I'm giving all the dream interpreters out there a little extra to work with, and also because I felt like it had some significance to what followed. I remember I was standing on the upper floors of a red Japanese temple, looking down from high above, as if the temple was as tall as a skyscraper. I thought, this is way too high, this is uncomfortable, and as I was looking down, all of a sudden, the people walking along the ground were much bigger, and now I was much closer to the ground. I was now only about 1 story up. But then it felt like I was still both very high up and closer to the ground at the same time, and it was a little disorienting. So switch to being inside the temple. This realization/conversation I had about neopronouns with myself lasted only about what felt like a minute, but it was a lot of information, oddly. There's a point in consciousness where information is no different from emotion or feeling, and it was through this feeling, this emotional perspective, that I saw a lot of nuances. This wasn't a visual dream, it was more of a mental conversation I had with myself. The dialogue I had mainly centered around the pronouns it, its. That was the forefront in my mind, but I'm sure this could be said of many others. It's difficult to remember in what order the dialogue and my feelings, as well as the objections to those feelings, flowed in time and chronology, but I do remember very much enjoying the idea of it pronouns. Not for myself, though, it was like experiencing a second-hand euphoria. I had actually felt this way a little in waking life, but those feelings were buried. In the dream, there was no question about the enjoyment of this usage. Now, the way I perceived the role neopronouns played in the collective consciousness, so to speak, was more than just, this is my gender and this is the pronoun that goes with it. It was a lot more than that, and I'll do my best to describe it all. In the collective consciousness, in society, whatever, there is a tendency for things to become rigid. I'm sure this is not news, but I felt like this pressure and rigidity had reached a point to where something had to give. This pent-up energy had to flow somewhere, and it was language itself that became a powerful vehicle by which that energy could find new expression. This might seem obvious. Some folks might think, well, of course neopronouns are like a rebellion against the status quo, or whatever, but it was the nature of this rebellion that was interesting. It wasn't what you could call a negative rebellion, where the point is simply to contradict or critique an oppressive structure. It wasn't like that. It was as positive a rebellion as you can imagine, like a release of energy, a flower growing out of concrete, or a stream that's been obstructed and finds new paths down to the ocean. Expansion out of a structure that's become frozen. And it wasn't just for the sake of the people who choose neopronouns for themselves. It was for the sake of everyone who wanted to take part in that new creation. There was something special about language specifically that made it a legitimate way to break that ice. Not only legitimate, but powerful. The message seemed to be, create new language. This message came through the feeling of joy at the thought of stepping outside the bounds of English. Like in a sense that a person who takes themselves too seriously needs a bit of absurdity in their life. There was an aspect of absurdity to all this, a loosening grip on the need for things to make sense. And I really wanted to align myself with this energy in the dream, to hold everything that was rigid at arm's length and to separate myself from it. There was a point in the dream where the part of me that objected made the comment, well, why don't they just learn a new language like Chinese? I can't remember the exact thought that spawned that retort. It must have been something to the effect of there being a need to break down the English language specifically. That objection was where the neopronoun part of my dream ended. The overall perspective I received, this information, wasn't being beamed straight into my head like an intellectual exercise. I genuinely felt the exaltation and joy of it all, like the release, the creativity, and the inherent value and light. As the days since the dream go by, which was New Year's night, the part of me that was resistant to these ideas is cropping back up, growing stronger and stronger, and I'm slowly beginning to forget what it felt like and what it really meant. The lights that I see have indicated that I was wrong about this subject before, but I kind of blew them off. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I speak of lights, you can watch my slightly less vague video about my based as hell hallucinations. But moving on, this dream wasn't really about whether people should be required to use others' neopronouns or not. Morality or ethics was not the point. You can choose to respect people by using their pronouns to the best of your ability, but if you're just doing it mechanically because it's expected, you're not really engaged in the healing potential of language. Personally, I don't think building another rigid structure around neopronouns will help, as that would be antithetical to what they represent. Let me briefly discuss a certain problem that has come up, and that is the possibility of slur pronouns, and why I believe that will eventually happen, and in good faith. As I already discussed, the entire energy and appeal behind neopronouns, perhaps specifically its pronouns, are breaking away from that which is deemed proper or appropriate. Anything outside modern expectations is a field of potential to explore. And here's the key, especially that which has been shunned or stigmatized. I'm not saying it's automatically good to indulge in all things stigmatized by society. You can fill in the blanks of what those things are. But as for stigmatized words themselves, there is a high potential to produce a real sense of euphoria in certain people by the very fact that they represent something outside the boundaries of polite society. Those who experience this euphoria may stay quiet about it for a while, but the feeling and desire will be there. Eventually, I think they will speak up about it. Now, I'll end this with a 2022 forecast, since I had this dream on New Year's night. When spiritual people make predictions, it usually follows a basic pattern, and pretty much all are summarized by this. The energy of the collective is active in a certain way, and it's up to the individual to decide how they will either resist it or ride the wave. The pent-up energy will express itself, but it will do so either as an act of positive creation or destructive acts against those involved in that creation, or perhaps paralysis or even insanity. The point is to be the person who is able to realize what forces are affecting them and to make choices consciously based on that knowledge, not in a controlling way, as spontaneity is something that transcends control. So for 2022, I just want to become a perspective epiphany junkie. To be honest, I can't stress enough how intrinsically pleasurable it is to see something in a whole new light. No matter how stuck you are in life, there's always a way to discover something new without even leaving your home. So, my advice is create consciously, embrace the absurd, and deconstruct your own preconceptions by seeing the innate joy in doing so. That's all for now, folks. Thanks for listening to my sermon. Bye.